Hello and welcome to another episode of the RevRx podcast, where we discuss how to have success in faith, family, and health. My name is Chad Potts, and I'm your host. And I'm so excited about today's episode where we're going to talk all things parenting. Today, our guest is Gregory Meadows, who is a leading voice and a leading visionary. He's a family life coach, and you're going to love the insights that he brings to us today. We dig deep into the social media for kids debate. We're going to talk about some of the harmful effects that come from trying to be friends first to our kids instead of parents. We're also going to talk about ways to remain curious and when it's okay to take a break from a conversation, to take a break from a disagreement, and come back to that later. We're going to talk about how to have a thriving family and how to raise children that will be able to think on their own and will be able to thrive themselves when they're no longer under our care. So buckle up. You're going to love this incredible episode. You're going to love Gregory and everything he stands for. So without further ado, I introduce you to my friend, Gregory Meadows. Thank you so much, Gregory, for joining us today on the RevRx podcast. What a pleasure it is to have you here with us.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, Gregory, you're a family life coach. And as we were talking a little bit before this, I talked about how unique that is. There's plenty of life coaches out there, but what makes you unique is this family component. So I'm interested to hear, kind of what led you down this road towards becoming a family life coach. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and just help us to get to know you a little bit better?
Yeah, absolutely. Started in a little small town in Paducah, Kentucky. And so I grew up in a pretty emotionally and verbally abusive household. They just didn't have the tools, and they were doing the best they could, but raised by a single mother.
Yeah.
And she had to be the dad and the mom. And so I was the oldest, so I got the brunt of the what I call riding the rusty bicycle. She did the best she could and things like that, but it was rough. So had to grow up real fast. I was graduating high school, and they're like, "What do you want to do?" And I'm like, "I don't know." And they're like, "Well, what are you good at?" And I was like, "Well, I think I'm pretty good at talking with people and helping people."
Mm-hmm.
And they said, "Well, why don't you go just be a therapist?" I was like, "Okay, sure." And I got a psychology degree from the University of Central Florida, but then I got a life coaching certification in 2003, and have helped hundreds of families over that time. And so, in my first job out of college, I was working with middle school kids who couldn't make it in public school for whatever reason, behaviors, challenges, cognitive challenges. And so I worked with those kiddos, and it sort of dawned on me that if I'm going to make an impact, I want to work with kids. And so, because kids are resilient, you can have the toughest circumstance and you can grow up to be the most amazing adult, human, family. Your past doesn't have to define you. It can inspire you, right? And I truly believe that things happen for us, not to us. And so at some point, we have to graduate out of victim mentality and really take responsibility for our lives. And so I really, really enjoy working with children, but helping parents is where it's much needed, right? Because I truly believe that if parents can be a good steward of their children's experience, then we can change this planet in one generation. One. It only will take one generation of parents and kids who break these cycles of trauma, of violence, of passing along things that we didn't get, and just gifting into the future through our children.
Yeah. It just takes one generation standing up and doing things the right way. I believe that can happen. Now, if we want to change our world, a lot of times we think we need to change policy or we need to change this or that. But really, to change our world, it just takes changing our children, changing our parenting methods. And I love that you said you really like helping children, but helping parents is where it's at. Because, hey, let's face it, if you help parents, you're going to help the child. And that's really cool. So.
Yeah, I think that when we get out of our kids' way, so to speak, they really mobilize their passion for change, their imagination. They're not bogged down by the barriers that we slowly gain as adults.
Mm.
They challenge the status quo. They are willing to bend and even break rules for the betterment of the community or the world and things like that. And so I
Sure.
feel that when we get out of the way of our kids, they will know what to do. They will know what their gift is, what their talents are, where they want to make a difference in the world.
And, I think they're naturally curious,
Yeah.
and they're kind of naturally creative and problem solvers. And, a lot of times we tend to box them in, don't we?
Yeah.
We stifle that a little bit. And so that concept of getting out of their way, I think, is an important one. So, um, today's a different world that we live in. It's far different than how I grew up, probably far different than how you grew up. What are some of the trends that you're seeing today that most impact the family unit? What are you seeing with this culture, this generation?
Yeah. So, two big things stand out for me is that one, parents want to be friends, not parents. And what I mean by that is that it's okay to be friendly. It's okay to joke around and have fun and to really create a relaxed environment and atmosphere.
Mhm.
But when we take on the role of a friend, we sometimes lose our authority and sovereignty as a parent when we need to execute on it.
Sure.
And so I see a lot of parents who want to be friends, and then when it comes time to like have some guardrails for our children's experience, then children are pushing back and saying, you can't tell me what to do. I'm almost a grown up. Those sorts of things, and it
Right.
really kind of creates an imbalance, right? Because they know that their friends don't tell them what to do,
Yeah.
right? And so when we act and look and talk and sound like their friends, that can get us into trouble in the
Sure.
long run. And I tell parents, your job is to not be the parent you want to be; it's to be the parent they need you to be, right? And so that is that's one big trend I see, and it really makes things difficult as they get older. They're going to start wanting autonomy and independence. They're going to need even more guardrails because their job as a child or a teenager is to push the boundaries, to see where there's safety, where there's not safety. What can I get away with?
Mm.
Well, what can I do that won't get me in too much trouble, but I'll get in a little bit of trouble, right?
Right. Right.
Right. So that to me is something that I always want to kind of point out and mention with families and stuff. There's this balance between I love you, but I'm in charge still,
Mm.
and not in a punitive, dictatorial sort of way, but like, hey, I need to make sure that you're gonna gain the values, the ethics, the critical thinking skills, so that when I'm not here,
Yeah.
you will make the best decision possible, right?
Right. It's a challenge, and and it's a temptation I think we all face because I think by nature most of us are people pleasers.
Yeah.
We want people to like us, and
Yep.
that doesn't exclude our children. We want
Yep.
our children to like us. We want them to be able to, to come to us and to confide in us. And
Yeah.
there is a delicate balance there, I believe.
Yeah.
And it's hard to draw that line. So there's not any kind of judgment or shame associated with this, but it's more of a, okay, well, how can I get better? And
Yeah.
one of the ways I think we can all get better is to make sure that, do a self check, be
Yeah.
self aware to the point to where you're able to say, all right, am I crossing that line of being their friend
Yeah.
and them not respecting my authority? And then
Right.
there's also the other extent too, which doesn't usually result in great outcomes, which is the authoritarian
Yeah.
dictator sort of parent.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but finding that balance, there is balance there.
Yeah.
There's a middle ground.
Yeah. I would agree with that, Chad. And when we unintentionally leverage our children into our own healing, which it naturally occurs anyway, because they will reveal everything that we need to work on about ourselves.
100%. Right.
100%, right? And um, and what most parents have to fight is that there is a biological urge, both in fathers and mothers, to protect our children.
Hmm.
So when they are crying, when they are tantruming, when they are throwing a fit, they are experiencing pain,
Right.
right? And
Right.
so we have a biological urge to lean into that, to save them from that, to protect them from that. But we have to be really mindful about what I consider a safety issue and what is an experience issue,
Mm.
right? And so we have to work on creating emotionally resilient children.
Yeah. Well,
Emotional regulation is the number one biggest challenge, I think, in children these days because they're so overstimulated, they're so inundated with peer pressure and different things like that. So, creating emotionally resilient children means we have to be emotionally resilient adults,
wow.
right? And so, finding that balance between I can feel my biological urge to nurture and protect versus, hey, this is an uncomfortable experience that they need
Mm.
because when they become an adult, there will be some version of this experience in their future,
Right.
whether it's their boss tells them no or I can't, and things like that. So it's really kind of being mindful of like, where do I need to step in because it's maybe a safety issue or something
Right.
like that versus an experience issue. And we want to gradually increase their capacity for resilience, right? And so obviously we're going to step in differently with a 3-year-old than we would with our 13-year-old, right?
Sure. Sure.
So,
Yeah, and that's really where life lessons are learned, I think. I think about my life growing up, and it's okay to feel hurt. It's okay to feel disappointment.
yeah,
It's okay to feel those emotions that you have that are associated with that. And you're right. As a parent, we want to step in and make everything better.
yeah,
Like my child's hurting. I want to make that better. Particularly as a man, like I
yeah,
want to fix that.
yeah.
you
We
know,
have a natural instinct to protect,
yeah.
right? So that is obvious, but we also, there's a saying, mothers are there to keep kids from getting hurt, and fathers are there to keep kids from getting hurt too bad.
Oh wow, yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
And so finding that balance of, okay, it's okay to feel this way.
Hmm.
It's going to help you because in life you will feel this way.
Yeah.
As an adult, you will feel this way. You need to have some sort of background in that and figure out how to work through it.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that comes from, you're right, us leading by example. Um, a lot of times I think we talk about uh, you know we talk about things with our children. They see a lot of times the problems in our marriages, for example.
Mhm. Yeah.
We may argue in front of our kids or
Yeah.
disagree in front of our kids, but you know what? They never. A lot of times they don't see us make up. They don't see that I'm sorry that comes later. They
Yeah.
don't see that working through the process.
Yeah.
So all they see is there's problems and then they go away.
Yeah.
Well, then whenever they get into real life situations as an adult, like, hey, my problems aren't going away. What's this whole process of working through it look like?
Yeah.
And I think we do them a disservice when we aren't including them as part of the process. And I
Yeah.
think maybe that's a good way to think about that whole situation. So number one is this whole trend of crossing the line of being a friend
Hmm.
more than we're establishing those guardrails to keep them from falling off. So,
Yeah.
what was the second one? You said you had two trends that you see.
Oh, I know this one's going to be a big one, and I slightly hesitate because Pandora is already out of the box, and I'm just going to say it. It's social media.
Yeah.
There's so much evidence. The Surgeon General yesterday came out
Yes.
and said that children under the age of 13 should not have social media.
Yep.
Um, there's higher incidence of anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation. Kids are thinking about suicide more than they ever have. And I think that, in not to mention, social media kind of presents a safety risk
Mm.
because sometimes children inadvertently share information that may not keep them safe
Yeah,
and
100%.
things like that. So, and I think the Surgeon General yesterday said that on average, children spend 5 hours a day
Hmm.
on screens,
Wow.
which
Wow.
is a tremendous amount.
Yeah.
And another statistic that I recently looked up is that by the end of our lifetime, at this juncture, so looking forward from 2024, humans will spend a total of 12 years on their screens.
Wow.
And that just kind of punches me in the gut. It doesn't feel right.
Wow.
I feel like we're missing out on these beautiful, amazing experiences
Yeah.
that as much as technology has improved our world and made it better and made us more interconnected and allow us to see things that were kind of in the darkness and shadows 30, 40 years ago, social media in my mind is a net negative.
Yeah.
And so I really encourage parents to be very diligent. And if you are a family that believes social media is okay, at least moderate it,
Yeah.
monitor it. You should have access to their accounts. You should be able to see what they're posting, who they're messaging, and things like that for safety reasons.
Well, it goes back to those guardrails, right?
Yeah.
That's our job as parents, is to establish guardrails to keep them safe. And you're right. I mean, it's kind of the elephant in the room these days.
Yeah.
It's very much at the forefront and at the center of our daily life.
Hmm.
And I think it's this generation, and you mentioned, we can change the world in a generation. Well, I think a lot of it kind of goes around the whole, like, how do we leverage technology in a way that's beneficial, but that is not detrimental?
Yeah.
When I was growing up, and maybe I'm showing my age a little bit, but I turned 40 this year. But when I was growing up, we watched Saturday morning cartoons.
Hmm.
Um, those were awesome.
Yeah. I could
And
I could eat a whole box of Lucky Charms in one sitting and no stomach issues and just watch cartoons from 8 to noon.
yep. And but there was, as I got older, I would watch sports, ESPN or something like that. But
Yeah.
there really wasn't this massive screen time issue. And I'm not comparing apples to apples, and I know that.
Yeah.
This generation's coming up, like the generation I'm raising my children in.
Yeah.
It looks a lot different. That's the only reason I say that, is because it looks a lot different.
Yeah.
There are lots more opportunities to engage with, the internet, social media, screens in general. There's all kinds of opportunities. And so with any opportunity comes responsibility.
Yep. And social media is a privilege, not a right.
Yeah.
So I think parents, when they keep that in mind, that um, children have to show that they can be responsible, right? Through chores, through their own decision making and things like that. And so as children graduate to different stages of development and different stages of life,
Mm-hmm.
then parents can extend them some privilege and
Right.
see how they do with it. And if they can't, because there are 15-year-olds who can't handle social media, and there are probably 10-year-olds who could.
Right.
So, it's really assessing each child individually in a family,
Right.
right?
Right.
Not fair is not always equal, right?
Correct. I love that. Yep.
Yeah. So,
And it carries a lot of weight. And I really like we're having this conversation today because of what came out yesterday. The Surgeon General is the same one that warns us about the harmful risk associated with tobacco.
yeah.
The Surgeon General is the one that that warns us about, the risk associated with alcohol and pregnancy.
Yeah.
And so it carries a lot of weight whenever you see this position being used to solidly stand against something that is unhealthy, particularly for our children.
Yeah.
Hey, I need to start thinking about that. And so that's really kind of what I wanted to say about this particular aspect is, we're not telling parents you have to do X, Y, Z.
Yeah.
What we're telling you is the evidence is out there and it's very clear
Yeah.
that it is harmful, potentially harmful for your children.
Yeah.
And so as a parent, what does it look like for you? Because everyone's different.
Yeah.
But think about that, sit with that, think through that. and think about what it looks like for you to establish those guardrails for your children so that they don't end up a statistic somewhere,
Yeah.
but so that they can optimize their life.
Yeah. And the science behind it is kind of around dopamine. So dopamine is a hormone that our brain releases when we have a peak experience, right? When we have an adrenaline rush. And so what happens with social media is that it literally opens the floodgates of our dopamine and it just floods our brain. And so what most people don't realize is that the part of the brain that loves dopamine can never get enough. So social media gives us that dopamine hit,
Yeah.
but eventually our brain acclimates and we need more of it.
Yeah.
And then we need more of it. And then we need more of it. And so that's why you see children who, may be using social media, or they're kind of gradually upping their potentially risky choices,
Yeah.
right? Because now their brain needs that adrenaline rush of dopamine and things like that. And our brains are designed to have a steady level of dopamine. And no time in history since we had social media over the last 20, 30 years has our brain not been able to handle the amount of dopamine that we are receiving through social media and scrolling and clicking and liking and all those sorts of things. And so our brains are hardwired to have just steady levels of dopamine. And then if we do something difficult, a challenge, like riding a bicycle for the first time with a child, once that child gets it and can stay balanced, our brain releases that dopamine because it's reinforcing that we did something difficult and we overcome.
Yeah.
Right?
It's a reward system.
It's a reward system. But when our brain is turned on all the time, we're looking for rewards in everything from the food that we're eating, the drinks that we're drinking, the choices that we're making with our friends, or, that sort of thing. So it's not meant to be on all the time.
Sure.
And so when it is, it can have negative impacts on the brain, on the way we see ourselves. I need to do this risky thing and I need to put it on social media because all my friends will like it.
Yep.
Trying to jump off the roof with an umbrella into the pool kind of thing,
Right.
So yeah.
And not to mention even things, that leads us into substance abuse and different things like that, hitting that same area. It can become almost like an addiction. It's that same pathway.
Yeah.
Think about even our personal use as parents and as adults. Think about how addicting it can be to, hey, I posted a video and it got a lot of likes, and so, man, that made me feel good, and now I want to put something else out there, and it becomes this game of, we, like I said, we're people pleasers by nature.
Yeah.
And that's one of the ways we find that fix. You'd mentioned before that kids are thinking about suicide. There's a lot of bullying that takes place in social media. So while we're looking for likes, what happens when we don't get the likes that we think we should? Then we start going down a negative spiral. What's been your experience with that, and leading to things like depression and anxiety?
Well, because we are so disconnected, and this part of this is cultural to the West. We have more nuclear families instead of intergenerational families living together, right?
Sure.
A young man or woman may say, oh, I'm going to do this cool dance. I saw this TikTok challenge, or I saw this, or I saw that, and I'm going to do it, and I'm going to go get those likes and things like that. And so when they don't get it, then they're like, oh, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with me? The core of me, not the video was off or the lighting was off. And so children really internalize things, right?
Kind of becomes their identity, it seems like.
Yeah, it becomes their identity because now they have sort of a real life persona, right? Like, I'm the good kid in my family, I'm the oldest, I'm the most responsible, or I'm the baby and I get special treatment. But then they have what I call a digital persona, right? Now I'm a jokester and a trickster, and my videos are cool and things like that. And so it creates kind of a dissonance, right? Because in their real life, it's just mom, dad, and my two brothers. But out in the world, I'm famous, or I'm getting more famous. And I heard I heard someone say they interviewed a bunch of children, recently, and like the number one thing kids wanted to be was an influencer
Hmm.
because they thought they would make millions of dollars and
Wow.
things like that. And it's just unfortunate that, you know, 2% of the population is an actual influencer. It's really a very small number of people on social media.
Right.
And so it can really be disheartening when kids wake up to the reality.
It's the challenge for sure. And it's one that, I think just the take home message here is, see what that looks like for your family.
Yeah.
Examine it, look
Yeah.
at it, look at the evidence, and see what you think is best for your family. It's worth investing time into. It's worth setting up those guardrails. When we're really trying to protect our children and, provide the best life for them, giving them what they want is not always the case. It's not
Yeah.
always the best case. So,
Yeah. You can be a loving, open, you can tell me anything kind of parent, and also say, hey, I'm so glad you told me that. I'm so glad you came to me. I'm so glad you called me at 12:30 in the middle of the night and asked me to come and get you from a party that you knew that was not going to be okay, or you were in trouble and things like that. And also, we have to talk about how that can't happen in the future, or that
yeah,
or we need to put some guardrails in place so that in the future you leave a party at 10 o'clock instead of 12:30,
yeah,
that sort of thing. And you definitely don't drink and drive, and things like that.
yeah. It's not an either or, and I think a lot of times we feel like we've got to choose one or the other. That third way, that middle way,
Yeah, it's both
is
and.
yeah, perfect.
Yeah.
Switching gears just a little bit. So you mentioned that you feel like we can change the world in a generation. Kind of starts with our families, right?
Yeah.
What does it look like for a family to be a strong, healthy family that can change the world? What are some components of that you teach in your life coaching,
Yeah.
and that you like to see families implement?
Yeah. So there's two tools that come to mind, and each family's different, but these tools are universal. So
Okay.
you can use them with your 2-year-old or your 20-year-old,
All right.
or your 5-year-old or your 16-year-old,
I
right?
like rules like that. Yep.
Yeah. And so these universal tools are, number one, be curious.
Hmm.
Always be curious. Be curious when they're like, hey, I've got this great plan. I've got this umbrella and the pool is right there. And I think I can make it from the roof to the pool. Okay. Okay. And in your mind, you're like, oh my gosh, trip to the hospital, blah, blah, blah. Right. But be curious, right? For example. So, okay. Have you measured the distance from the roof to the pool? And you know that the umbrella is probably not strong enough for even a strong wind to hold up. And how much do you weigh? Oh, you weigh 165 pounds. Okay. Okay. How do you think that's going to go? What are the risks?
Hmm.
Right. Well, what could go wrong? What could go right? Right.
Mm-hmm.
So, in being curious, and I'm using kind of an extreme example, but
Right.
in every little thing, the curiosity that you have shows that, number one, you're interested in their experience. You're curious about how they think about the world,
Right.
right? And you're teaching them critical thinking skills,
Absolutely.
right? So even though they're going to ask you for permission that in 0.001 seconds you're going to say no to,
Right.
but as a parent, you step back, you say, okay, well, I have some questions. I just Let's think through this. I'm not saying no yet, but let's think through this.
Right.
Okay, okay, okay. Are your friends going to be there? Are adults going to be there at this party? Is there going to be alcohol there? Do I know the parents? Can I have the parents' phone number? These sorts of things, right? So starting to be curious is a massive tool that you should implement every day, all day, right? Because
Right.
being curious keeps the relationship open and connected, keeps the door open, right? So I would say that would be a huge tool that you can use at any age. And it's not just for parents to children, it's between spouses too, right?
Yeah, I like that.
Hey, I'm curious about why you gave that punishment. Can we talk about it privately, right?
Hmm.
Because, you know, with two-parent households, it's you and your partner together against the problem
Yeah.
to solve the problem, right? It's not you against your partner against the problem, right?
Sure.
So working together, to solve problems and being curious with them, right? Like, hey, I think they need to be grounded for a week. That was a pretty serious issue. And then maybe you talk to your partner and your partner says, well, okay, you know, uh, why did you feel like this is a safety issue? Why do you think
Mm.
this is a risk issue? That sort of thing. So
Right.
being curious in life in general opens you up to possibilities that you may not see before. And even more importantly, if you are a reflexive reactor as a parent, right? You
Yep.
tend to like lay the
No.
hammer down like immediately.
Right.
Being curious will allow a reflexive parent who might get angry right away or raise their voice right away or deliver a consequence right away. It gives them an opportunity to step back.
Yeah.
So practice being curious because it is like a muscle. You're not going to go in to a situation with your toddler and bench 350 in your curiosity muscle, right?
Right.
Right. So it takes practice,
Yeah.
just asking questions, thinking it through, and things like that. So that's a huge tool that I recommend for anybody of any age, parents, partners, that sort of thing.
I love that because so I'm a reflexive responder.
Okay.
I tend to say, and granted, maybe it's just where I am in my parenting journey. Um,
Mhm.
you know, 3, 5, and 7. That's an interesting age.
Yeah, and
But
there's times to do that.
right.
There's absolutely times to do that. If your 2-year-old is wandering towards the pool, you need to be a reflexive reactor,
Right. When
right?
it's a safety thing, sure.
It's a safety thing, right? Or if the kid's got a bag of flour running around the house, you know, turning everything into ghosts.
Yep.
Like,
Yep.
okay, maybe you need to respond and step in. But there's definitely situations where,
Yeah.
you can step back and just be curious.
Yeah. And whenever you just say no, what's usually the first question they ask?
Why?
Why? Why?
Yeah.
And so, that's the flip side. And I'm turning into my parents. I'm like, because I said so. And that doesn't help, right?
Yeah.
That's what they're wanting to know is help me think through this. What is it about this that you said no about? So rather than, I really like that. That's something that I'm going to work on because uh, with that, you're teaching them, like you said, critical thinking. You're
Yeah.
teaching them to be able to stand on their own 2 feet. And so something becomes not a good idea, not just because dad said so,
Yeah.
right? That's not helpful. That's not teaching them anything.
Yeah.
But it's not a good idea because X, Y, Z. And that's something they can carry into adulthood and be able to think through things on their own. So I think that's fantastic. That's great.
Yeah. And the sort of secondary gain for that is that the primary is that you're teaching them how to think for themselves. The secondary is you're teaching them how you think,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So eventually, as they get into adolescence and teenagers, they move from egocentric to ethnocentric, and what that means is they go from thinking about myself, my wants, my desires. I'm just taking. I'm the center of the universe. I'm just taking and what I want. Versus now I have the capacity to put myself in someone else's shoes.
Sure.
So as you're, 357, I think you said,
Hmm.
as your 7-year-old becomes 14 and you've done this enough with them,
Yeah.
they'll start to go, they'll start to almost osmotically or in a way, they'll channel dad,
Mm.
right? Oh, I think dad's going to probably say no to this, and
Right.
because it's dangerous, or that sort of thing. So you also are giving them sort of a secondary gift and kind of knowing like, hey, I think I think my mom and dad are not going to be okay with this, and because they've practiced critical thinking, they've
Yeah.
also you have modeled it for them too
Yeah.
in your own thinking as a parent, right? And so you're helping them kind of understand, I love you, and it's probably not safe to be out at 12:30 at night with your friends who are drinking, and they might be having fun, but there's risk,
Right.
right? And
Right.
so things like that.
That's cool. So number one, being curious. And you've got me curious. What's number two?
Yes. The second one is pretty universal. It's taking a break.
Hmm.
And what I mean is, before you overreact or react in a way that you will regret later, I want you to take at least one breath,
Hmm.
because I want your no to mean no, and I want your yes to mean yes. And so when we do that and we take enough time, because we're still human beings, when we have a triggering experience, we move from the logical part of our brain to the animal part of our brain,
Right.
right?
Right.
So,
Gotcha.
Chad, you and I are in a disagreement, things like that. I'm gonna say, I think I'm feeling a little bit out of control. I feel like I might say something or do something that might impact the situation. So I want to take 30 minutes. I'm going to set a timer on my phone, and I commit to coming back in those 30 minutes when that timer's done, and I'll let you know where I'm at.
Hmm.
If I need more time, I will do it. If we can have a conversation, both of us are calm, let's have that conversation. And so
Yeah.
with parents and kids, either person can call for a break,
Right.
but that's where you
Right.
have to be the parent and say, okay, I'm going to give you space, but eventually we need to talk about it. And
Yeah.
so it's important for parents to kind of read the room, right? If your child is in the middle of a video game, that's probably not the right time to talk about, hey, that thing you did yesterday, blah, 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 right?
Hmm.
Right before they're going to bed may or may not be the right time,
Sure.
right before they go to school. So timing is really important around this concept of taking a break. But I really, really like it because it gives opportunity for the child to emotionally regulate, for you to emotionally regulate, and you guys could co-regulate together
Sure.
if that's possible, right? Because kids need us to regulate their tiny little nervous systems that are overstimulated, because that's how their brain develops, right?
Right.
So in doing that, it really can shift the energy from one of conflict, strife. You never listen to me. You never do what I tell you to do anyway.
Yeah.
Those sorts of things,
All
right?
these generalizations. Right.
Yeah, yeah. So taking a break is probably the second most powerful thing that you can do next to being curious.
I love those tools. All right. So when I'm counseling couples
Yeah,
in my pastoral role, a lot of times what I see is this escalation of an argument. So it begins with you're arguing about a disagreement over whatever. But it seems like from there, and depending on personality types and different things, a lot of times from there, it escalates into this thing that's no longer about the original problem,
right.
but it's these, "Oh, I'm going to hurt you because I'm mad at you."
Yeah,
And then the other person says, well, you hurt me, so now I'm going to hurt you worse. And
yeah,
it just becomes this perpetual cycle. And that happens with our kids. That happens with any time we're arguing with another human being.
yeah,
That can happen.
yeah,
And while that may sound extreme, it's really a lot more common than I think than we like to realize. And, there's this tit for tat. Um,
yeah,
you said this about me. I'm going to say this about you. And what that break does is it just gives you time to say, you know what, in the heat of this moment, I'm going to do damage to our relationship.
yeah,
And the things that we say, the hurt that we cause, okay, you can be removed from that over time, but that
yeah,
still is going to stick around sometimes.
yeah,
Our words have power. They can tear down or they can build up.
yeah,
And a lot of times those words that tear down are said in those moments of tense arguments.
yeah.
And so I
Those,
love that tool because that removes you from it when you feel yourself, okay, well, this is not going to end well.
yeah,
It becomes about being self-aware enough to say, I'm going to step away from this for a minute.
yeah. When your logical part of your brain is not online,
Yeah.
you're speaking from any sort of wounding, trauma that's happened in the past, the way your parents talked to you, something that happened with your boss earlier in the day. And
Yep.
so I think it's really imperative to, like, when you feel triggered, whether you're the parent or the partner,
Right.
to say, hey, I love you, and I'm going to step back for a second.
Right.
I love you. And it's our job as fathers and mothers to protect the relationship.
Yeah.
And when I talk to couples and stuff about protecting the relationship, you protect the relationship from not only from outside enemies, right?
Right.
Maybe you got a mother-in-law or a father-in-law that kind of inserts themselves in, or you've got a neighbor who's just nosy, and so not only protecting the relationship and the family from
Right.
outside enemies, so to
Right.
speak, right?
Right.
But also from enemies within, right? That could be my own wounding from my own childhood. It could
Sure.
have been something from work. And sometimes we have to protect the relationship from ourselves and from each other, right?
Yeah. I love you enough that I'm not willing to
Yeah.
harm our relationship to talk about this now.
Yeah.
So that's super powerful.
Yeah.
Well, Gregory, man, I love the space that you're in. I love what you're doing in this world. I love how you're looking to change the world a generation at a time. If I've got listeners that want to learn more about you, or if they want to get into your world of family life coaching, how might they go about that?
Yeah. So I'm on Facebook, Gregory Meadows. And then I also have a free parenting support group. It's Parenting Support with Gregory at Walking Meadows.
Okay.
So you can kind of use Meta now on Facebook to look that up.
Sure.
I also am on Instagram, Walking Meadows. So you can reach out through any of those mediums. My website is walkingmeadows.com. So you can reach me through there. I also I teach virtual parenting classes. So everything that we've discussed today are principles in my virtual parenting class that I teach. And I also do parenting support groups. So if there's a community or an agency or something like that, I can do sort of confidential, closed parenting support groups virtually where parents can be with other parents. A lot of times parents are isolated or feel isolated. Like none of my other friends have kids that are going through this, right?
Right.
And things like that. So I do virtual parenting support groups as well.
Awesome. I'll put links to those things in the show notes as well. But Gregory, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for the values that you're instilling into families and for bringing value to this conversation. It's one that's much needed, one that I think can really help a lot of people. And so I just appreciate you being willing to be on here and help us out.
Yeah, I'm honored to be here. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the RevRx podcast. We hope you enjoyed what you heard today, and if so, we'd love it if you would hit that subscribe button so that you'll never miss a new episode from us. Also, feel free to leave us reviews and comments, as we'd love to hear from you. Be blessed and be the very best you.